to warm up a little bit before we go live, right? I always think. But now you're
Normally,
just straight into it. No warm up.
Yeah.
no warm up.
Yeah.
Go right in.
And I guess we're
Nothing.
live, right? Hi,
We are.
everyone. Warm welcome to what is a DAC7 drop. It literally is a drop in. Both myself, Eiko, and Attila dropped in ourselves last minute as well. Normally, we have some time to prepare and warm up, but this time around, we just went straight for it. Today's session is really to discuss with you all like-minded people facing the same complexity when it comes to DAC7, some of the latest news that we see in the field, some practical updates, and some pragmatic issues that we are already spotting that may be worthwhile flagging to you and to each other. So it's really like a practical working session. For those of you that don't know us, we have Attila on the line, who is our subject matter expert on anything really data sharing, DAX number validation, and of course then also DAC7 and CSOP, as you can imagine. We have Eiko on the line, Alexander Kobakidze, but for everyone that knows him, Eiko, who is our head of tax technology, and myself. Just a quick introduction. I'm Rob. I'm the chief tax officer here at Fonoa, trying to talk it all together for you. But Eiko, maybe you can start today by sharing some practicalities on the platform. That's always a good start, I think.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for that intro as well. Thank you, everyone, for dialing in today. There's quite a few of you on the call today, and I noticed that some of you have never used this platform before. At least you've told me that before dialing in. This is DAC7 drop-in. We're using a platform called Livestorm. At the bottom, you have options to ask questions. In today's session, unlike other sessions, for those of you who have dialed in before, we normally have two functions. We normally have the ability to chat, and we have the ability to ask private questions. For this session only, we're having the ability to ask private questions. Why? So to avoid any confusion, if you want to ask something sensitive, we're not going to be calling out companies or anything like that. So you can have the confidence that you can have questions being asked in private.
Ask away. Yeah, exactly.
Ask away. And we have removed the confusion of you being asking those questions in the chat. So for now, you won't be able to see who's dialed in, I imagine, but there's quite a few of you on the call. Just for additional background, there are also a wide variety from both our clients who already work with us. There's also people who are new to us, as well as some tax advisors on the call who are very well versed within the DAC7 space as well. So it's great to have everybody coming together. I wish we could do the chat functionality, but again, from certain requests that you are able to ask questions more privately, we have disabled that. Why are we talking about this in the first place? What gives us let's say, the credibility and the ability to go and speak? Well, Attila, over the last 6 to 9 months, maybe actually a little bit longer than that, has been working in the background, building up the solution. So we've been working on a solution for filing of DAC7 and data sharing more broadly, both within Europe and, of course, outside, as and when it is introduced in new countries. As a result, we have been asked several questions, certainly within the last week, about data sharing and DAC7 in particular, and about the challenges that some companies are experiencing within this space. We're not immune from that ourselves. I think, Attila, we're safe to say that we have encountered some surprises along the way as you've been working and building. And rather than replying to everybody one by one, we thought, you know what, since this is coming up more often than not, let's get everybody on a call, whoever's interested in this, and answer the questions that we've received. Again, if you do have questions that we're not going to cover today, please feel free in the chat to go and answer them. I don't promise you that we know the answers, but we will flag them and see if we do know the answers.
Or connect you. Exactly. Yeah.
So how did we want to cover today's session? I think we wanted to cover three things. Essentially, we wanted to go into country readiness. So we want to talk about what are the delays, what are the planned delays, unplanned delays. We also want to talk about the technical submission issues that we've come across and we've heard others are stumbling into, depending on the countries that they're filing, and other issues and conflicting views. So things where we hear varying degrees, depending on who you talk to, which advisor you speak to, you hear very, very different opinions. We just want to flag all of those things for you, and hopefully this will help you within the next 2 days to either file the submission or at least understand where the complexities are coming in. Rob, have I missed anything? Attila, have I missed anything?
Not at all. No, the only thing that I would add is what you already kind of mentioned is some of the questions that we have may be worthwhile discussing either locally with your local friendly neighborhood tax authorities and or advisors to just clarify at a deeper level. Some of the questions that we come across, we haven't been able to figure out ourselves either, and or are subject to like a legal, basically like a further legal analysis of the issue.
Last thing I did forget to mention, it's not important, that's probably why I forgot it, but the emojis are enabled for the session. So if you do want to react, respond with shock, horror, love, or thumbs up to anything that's been raised, feel free to do so. The button is there at the bottom. Thank you. And with that, shall we get started?
Let's do it.
All right, Attila, can you walk us through the first question, country readiness. Can you talk us through who's ready, who's not ready? Are we all filing by the 31st of January? Who's announced that they're going to delay, and then any other issues that you might want to flag along those lines?
Well, we are certainly not filing in every country by the original deadline. As some of you may have seen, I've been trying to keep track of this on my LinkedIn as well. I just did an update because I had an original post last month that only had 3 countries, and since then there's been developments. So namely, Germany famously and very thoughtfully have officially delayed the submission deadline to the end of March. Well, in more technical terms, the tax authority announced that they will not object to any platform filing late. That is the specific terminology they're using. They have referred to this as their systems not being ready in time in order for platforms to get everything ready in time to be able to submit their filings. As far as I understand, their API is already accepting some filings, but they will also soon have an upload drag and drop functionality, which is not live just yet. So interestingly, it would have been easier the other way around, but you need to write some software to connect to that API. Luxembourg also published the deadline extension very thoughtfully. Again, they have announced the deadline giving 1 month until their system is live. I haven't checked in the past week whether their system actually went live, but if it didn't, then it means that the deadline is still being extended every day by an additional 30 days. And then on top of that, we are just hearing very new developments from local Polish advisors. The local Minister of Finance just informally announced that the DAC, although they are going through with the DAC7 transposition law, yes, the law is still not transposed in Poland. And they just commented on the proposed timing of the transposition of the law. Obviously, you know that there's been a change in government in Poland, so that did hold up much of the legislative procedures. There's word on the street that the deadline for this year is going to be extended to the end of 2024, and then for the 2024 reporting period, platforms will be required to file in the normal deadline, so that is January 31st, 2025. And then talking about changes in government, a similar situation evolved in Spain, another change in government holding up legislative procedures. Now the Spanish tax authority or the Minister of Finance did have a public consultation back in December, a short period, but the law is still not transposed in Spain. And as far as I'm aware, there's still no official word on an official deadline extension. So we're eager to hear any intelligence from Spain, but nothing so far. We can only speculate that there's going to have to be a deadline extension. And on top of that, there's also Cyprus, which have officially extended their deadlines to the 16th of February as of now. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Attila, from what you're saying, so just in a summary, there are countries that have delayed, essentially formally, up until later. Not all the delays are until the same period. So some are, you mentioned Germany, up until the end of March, others until February, middle of February. Question for me is, if I'm filing centrally, so as there is an option to file centrally, if I'm a platform that's filing, let's say in the Netherlands, Ireland, or in one of the other countries, do I still need to submit the information? Do you know if there's any clarity whether you need to submit the information for those other jurisdictions as well, or do you file later?
Yes. So if you're filing centrally in another jurisdiction, so first and foremost, there's obviously a local notification requirement in every country where you have sellers. to notify the local tax authorities just of the fact that you're in scope and then you're filing in another jurisdiction centrally.
Yep.
On top of that, you do have to take in consideration what happens if one of your territories did have a deadline extension, but your others didn't. So let's say you have operations, in a simple example, in Ireland and Germany, and of course one of those countries have extended the deadline, the other hasn't. In that case, one may argue that you can hold off reporting for those German sellers and then just report your Irish sellers for the time being, keeping to the original deadline. But this is up to legal scrutiny because there's not a whole lot of information or clarity on these situations. Obviously, the lawmakers didn't prepare for this.
So if I was in house today, I would be going to ask my advisors on this specific point. I know that we're on the tech side, so we build the solutions, but in terms of coming back and actually asking these questions, I'm just saying that I have more questions from a data protection point of view. For example, if there's countries that haven't ratified the legislation, should I be submitting information on those sellers to those jurisdictions as well? For example, I think there's a couple of countries in that bucket, of course.
Absolutely, because you basically don't have, as of yet, in some of these countries mentioned, you don't have
a legal framework. The
legal framework to share this information, especially with a third country. So, that's it's hard to make a decision what is the most prudent approach.
But in terms of the jurisdictions, let's say Ireland and the Netherlands, they're not delayed. Their systems are up and running. We'll come to the technical submission issues in just 1 second. I know that they're not. It's not problem free, but if I choose to file for the Netherlands, Spain, Poland, through those countries, they're not blocking you right now, right? It's up to them how they file and use that information later on.
Correct. So you can theoretically file all your countries. Rob, you had something you wanted to?
No, I just want to recap just to clarify for everyone online, which countries are not ready from a county readiness perspective. Forget about the technical side for now, just to make that hard distinction, right? Because there's a difference between being ready formally, legalistically, but then not practically, versus not having anything in place at all. Like you mentioned, some of them have not even ratified legislation.
Yes. So again, just for ratifying legislation, it is Spain and Poland who have not been able to ratify. There may be others, but those are the two bigger economies that we've uncovered so far. And then from a technical perspective, it's a moving target, Rob. So it may be true yesterday that Germany's system technically wasn't working, but it may be working as of this minute. So I can't really comment on that. I can just comment on those countries that have announced official deadlines with extensions, which is Germany, Luxembourg, Poland, and Cyprus at this point.
Cyprus as well. Okay, got it. Okay.
Got it. And then in which case, moving on to the other topics, to technical submission issues. And actually, even before moving on to this, I think I saw a couple of questions coming in through the chat.
Yeah,
maybe want to do one of them is related to delays as well. Look, based on the experience that you're seeing on DAC7, Attila and Rob, maybe over to you. What do you expect to see for CSOP as well? If there's a couple of takeaways.
Which is a great question, by the way. I'm happy to share my 2 cents, Attila, but you're the expert on it. My sense is, I think that you're probably going to see similar technical issues as well there, because it's although similar, it's slightly different, from a technical perspective, slightly different teams dealing with it, so it may not rely on the exact same infrastructure, which could be an issue then again. I think what you will see is, hopefully, at least, that there are some lessons learned and that the overall delays will be less there than it is now. And I sincerely hope that they will give platforms more opportunity ahead of time to be clear on what's expected versus what we've seen with DAC7, of course, which in some countries was very late, as in even now too late. So I think it will probably be a mixed bag again, but my sense is that you will see more information ahead of time, still some less legalistic issues, but more technical issues still, like we see today as well. That would be my 2 cents. What do you think, Attila?
Yes, so there's one thing that's a lot simpler in terms of CSOP, which is the XML format, which is centrally defined and in a legally binding way by the EU itself. Whilst in DAC7, most countries are using the OECD's XML schema, but everyone was free to use their own flavor, and we have seen slight variations in comparison to the original central OECD schema. In terms of CSOP, we will see a lot less. It's just going to be like the technical last mile certification or digital certificate needed for the filing itself. Although in terms of CSOP, it's much more. It's a lot more companies affected because there's many more banks and other types of financial institutions, and those companies will all be required to submit filings in every country where they operate locally. So there's a lot more additional complexity there. So, but it's really hard and very speculative to comment on whether or not there will be deadline extensions. Now, seeing that there's issues with DAC7, one may say that it's likely that one or the other country may have an extension. And I see a specific question in the chat, in the questions. I think I can address real quick. So, what happens if there's changes to, let's say, there's a commission amount that's invoiced to the seller in the subsequent year? So, a commission amount invoiced to the seller in 2024. But it is regarding activity for 2023. So we have seen clarifications, I believe, from Ireland, for instance, and this may be true for Germany as well, that all these types of amounts that are part of the DAC7 submission are due to be reported in a cash flow basis. So you report based on when the amounts or the the credit notes hit the seller's bank account. So you need to, so in this case, even if it's a 2023 commission, I would say it would have to be included in the 2024 filing.
Yeah, one thing to add on this, and this specifically maybe to this point, cash versus accruals. I've heard that they're depending on the company and depending on the platform, there will be difficulties from one versus the other. If your entire system is a bit geared to one type of reporting, but not to the other, that is definitely something to flag to the authorities. I've seen that being flagged during the consultation processes in some of the countries that you mentioned, Attila, and it's received well from the other side. So definitely, if you're having those problems, I would definitely flag them to see if you can explain what are the differences are, because repurposing your entire financial system from one type of reporting to another is going to be a bit of a challenge. Okay, can we talk through the technical submission issues that you've encountered so far as well? So I know that you're looking at maybe just not the whole of the EU, but focus on Ireland, Netherlands for now, because that's where the majority of the reporting is, but then you can touch upon others as well.
Absolutely. So let me start with Ireland. There it's like a last mile issue. The XML won't go in, and we have uncovered that, and very interestingly, this was not specified in the Irish technical guidance up front. So we had to figure this out together with clients by testing, essentially, that the Irish tax authority's systems will not allow certain special characters. And we were very surprised to learn that some of these special characters are not even that special, even for the English alphabet. They won't accept, for instance, an apostrophe, which is very common, even in English or Irish names, personal names, company names, and specifically addresses. But it goes beyond. There's, of course, the usual special characters, a hashtag, and sign, exclamation, comma, etc. These are commonly included in company names these days, and we are surprised to see that they just won't be accepted. And then finally, of course, and probably most importantly, umlauts and different types of accent marks in different various European languages. My name has 3 umlauts, which is omitted now for the purpose of the session. So if I was being reported in Ireland due to one of the platforms, my name would appear quite a lot different. And I'm not sure if, so I'm based in Hungary, I'm not sure how the Hungarian tax authority would like to receive this degraded data about me and potentially not being able to identify me properly because my data was submitted over in Ireland and then some characters were omitted from my name.
It's basically cleansed, yeah. So what you're saying is that whatever data is submitted to the Irish government has to be cleansed in some way, shape or form, although it's unclear how exactly right now.
Essentially, Yeah, essentially it needs to be the English alphabet.
Standardized in one way or the other. Yeah, and then what you're saying is depending on how tax authorities on the other end would actually be able to reconcile that. Although I hope that they wouldn't do it per se only based on your name, right? In the ideal world, they have some additional information, but maybe there's a mismatch there even. Got it.
Absolutely.
Can I ask you a curveball question, Attila? Because you know, I think you know this one. It's to do with something on ID validation. Sometimes for individuals, you need to validate the name against so you can't just type somebody's social security number, or you can't type their tax ID and return it from the systems where that is available in the European Union. Do those hyphens, do they make an impact there or not? Do you remember from the top of your head?
It depends on the country. So there's only a few countries in the EU where you're able to check the private individual's name with their tax ID. Spain is a good example. Italy is another one. In Spain specifically, I know that the system is very forgiving when making typos, those type of changes. I can't really comment on the others. For instance, an example outside the EU, Mexico, there you need a exact 100% match, not only for personal names, also for company names. So there it's causing a lot of headache. But this is
so we know in Spain it's forgiving, but for the other, I think it's something like 8 or 9 countries that you can validate their personal tax IDs in. But for the others, we just don't know. So if people are double checking, just to something to be aware of.
And on that, Eiko, if I can just add, this is a question that also came up a bunch of times. So it's worth noting that so when we're talking about the tax ID validation obligation within DAC7, it's worth noting that when you're doing the actual filing, so as the data is being transmitted to the tax authority, they are not checking the tax IDs. That's impossible. They can only check for data completeness and whether you are obeying the file rules. So they're essentially just checking if you have populated all the required fields like tax ID and whether they are all populated with the right type of data. So for instance, for countries, wherever they require a country, that's usually defined by an ISO code, so a 2-letter abbreviation of the specific country. So DE for Germany, for instance, then they are checking that it's a field that only contains 2 characters and they are both letters. So they are checking for these type of technical rules. They are not checking the tax IDs. They will check the tax IDs, but only after submission, they've got the details, and likely only checking the tax IDs for their own country. And then they are redistributing the data across the other EU jurisdictions, which will then in turn run their own tax ID validations in the background locally just for their own countries.
Got it. Makes sense. So Ireland has issues here. Do you have any idea when this will be resolved?
If it will be resolved, I
imagine at least they would have to give us a list with the characters that are not accepted, right? So from that perspective, there needs to be a resolution.
Yeah, it's funny because they have a test facility. It's a website, and you can upload an XML for testing purposes. Like pro tip: don't send any actual data there, just test data, because no one knows how secure that is. It's just an open website. So just use it for test data. We can link to that later on if you don't have it just yet. There, if you do these, if you hit these errors, they will only give you some special characters that are not allowed. But then we have already uncovered a few additional ones which are also not allowed. And I've asked technical support specifically to define the full list of the special characters not allowed, and they have not been able to get back to me as of today. I've followed up, but no word since, unfortunately.
Maybe we can check with some of our customers that we have there that are large and in scope, what they've been discussing with them so far.
Yeah.
Maybe they have more news. But this is a good one. What other countries do have technical issues?
Yeah, so we have, I really like the Dutch tax authorities approach. They seem to be very technical. They have been, of course, one of the first to provide technical guidance back in the summer. They have run through, this has sort of like become an issue of its own, that they're too good, that they've run at this point, I think 10 or 11 implementations of the system. They keep updating, and
but the person who's registered gets regular updates in an email, which is super nice. And they were very foregoing in letting affected platforms know that they had a bit of an issue communicating in their backend. So there's a technical entity called Logius. They are handling sort of like the technical infrastructure, and then there's a tax authority, which is a separate entity. And there was a communication issue between those two entities, but now it's resolved. So from the Dutch tax authority, we can expect that whenever they uncover issues or bugs on their side, they will inform us. Yes, so it's a really nice and supportive approach there.
So no issues there at the current?
No, we have cross-checked there when we uncover the Irish issue with special characters, and so far so good. We have not seen any similar issues with the Dutch tax authority.
I think, by
the only one I heard about was to do with certificates, but I don't know if there's something worthwhile going into here. Was that just for people to be aware of that registrations across various different countries, Attila, right? They're completely different. So in the Netherlands, you do need a certificate for encryption purposes, if I understand correctly. But maybe you can talk about that more.
Yeah. So far this previous section was more about the very last mile technical glitches, and now if we take a step back and look at what is technically required, what are the prerequisites from a technical perspective to even connect to the right API of the tax authorities, then it will usually be a digital certificate that you need to acquire one way or the other. Yes, this is in order so that the platform operator, so the specific entity that is registered for filing and is performing the filing, can connect to the tax authority with a big flag saying that, hey, I'm this company and there's an official certificate attached to my submission so that you know who I am, and now I'm let in the door. So it's sort of like knowing the secret code to the party. So the ways to acquire this certificate has varied specifically from country to country, which is one of the major hurdles of supporting all these different countries or building out the connections to all these different countries. And then referring back to CISO for just a second here, that is going to be the biggest hurdle, I think. So many of these companies will have to report in all the 27 member states. And imagine just wrapping your head around the different certificate acquisition procedures for 27 countries, 27 completely different procedures. So to give you a bit of an example of how the flavors go in Ireland, of course, you need to register for the Irish Tax Authorities portal. If you're not a resident, if you're a resident, you already have a registration there automatically. And then once in, there's certain steps you need to take to register for DAC7 at the first place. Once that is done, then you need to generate a DAC7 filing certificate separate to your regular login certificate. These are the same file types, but a different certificate. One is only used for DAC7 filing. So that is issued by the Irish Tax Authority. In the Netherlands, they outsourced it to the market, and they are saying or redirecting you to acquire certificates from certificate providers. One big name we can mention is KPN, a local big telecom provider. You can go to them. We've seen that they have sort of like a self-serve approach. You need to go through their website. It's very complicated and it's not translated to English. Another provider who we worked with is called DigiCert. It was a very clean process for us. They had on-hand support, and they were very easy to work with. Of course, there's like legal requirements. You need your company's director to identify themselves in front of a public notary. So it's a treacherous process, and then only at the end, only at the end you will get your certificate, which is a file. So just so you understand what is a certificate, it is one file. It's sort of like an encryption key on your computer. It looks like one single file, and it comes with a password. So you need to use that file and a password in order to identify yourself in front of the tax authority, and then it's the same process 27 times over. Imagine that.
If you're filing locally in every country, right? Can I ask you, what's the typical timelines? What do you, is it fast anywhere?
You mean acquiring the certificate?
Yeah.
No. It's,
okay.
Something that you want to be careful with.
It is. Yeah,
okay, so something to plan ahead. I mean, there's a few folks have got, today's the 29th, by the 31st, it's going to be a challenge if they haven't applied already.
Yeah. 100%. But now you can apply some pressure perhaps because this is something required. And just to, just one last thing to mention specifically with the Netherlands, we have seen, and this is some practical advice we can give now. So the Dutch tax authority, well, obviously every tax authority must have the option to register non-resident providers and choose their location. And there's been some confusion internally at the Dutch tax authority. So it seems this has been communicated by Logius that whether or not non-resident entities can acquire even the certificate required. This was apparently changed recently. Previously it was allowed, now it's not, and there has been some confusion. We have been advised two different options if you're not able to acquire a certificate through one of these private companies offering this service. One option is to, and this was specifically communicated by Logius, was to request an individual deadline extension from the Dutch tax authority for the time being until you figure it out. And then just today, I received communication again from Logius technical support. So this is the technical entity handling the infrastructure, that there's a third option, which is getting in touch with the local fiscal representative, and they can request a certificate for you, and then you can perform your filing that way.
Attila, I know you're talking a lot about the Netherlands specifically in this case, but generally speaking, from speaking to other clients who are filing in different jurisdictions, it's not been. The Netherlands are a great example of this, but I think it's also seen in other jurisdictions as well, which are trying to keep up and make sure that the portals are open by the 31st and ready to submit, that you can reach out to various tax authorities on the matter. Either that or speak to your local advisors. I think they'll have the connections there. But generally, what I'm hearing is that countries are quite open to talk about it.
Absolutely, but we're hearing from other countries as well. Some of our clients are struggling to get the XML format right in order for the tax authorities' systems to accept it. So it's not an easy process.
What countries are those? Just to kind of give the audience an idea.
We have heard, I believe, from Portugal and Latvia most recently, and I believe we are about to hear a lot more examples.
Got it. Okay. And in those cases, it's unknown what the actual issue is at this point, right? They're just data exchange issues. Okay.
It has to be sort of like the XML formatting. So what are the required fields? We have also uncovered some specific rules, whether or not some of these fields are mandatory or not. That apparently is changing from country to country to a certain extent, not a lot, but there are some. Those are the hardest to spot differences.
Okay, I have an interesting question here that I think is worthwhile sharing with you, which is, given that we're talking about the Dutch and the Irish anyway, do the Dutch or Irish rules currently require reporting in respect of non-EU sellers, resident in jurisdictions with whom exchange agreements are in place? If not, do we expect these rules to be updated to require such reporting for financial year 24? Is the question.
Yes, so that is one specific example for that is particularly interesting for accommodation providers. Yes, so far, if and this is, please don't hold me to this. This is just my personal subjective opinion. But if you're reading the rules, it simply says that if you've got physically EU located properties, then the seller is in scope of reporting. And then most recently, an interesting sort of like the reverse of this scenario was clarified by the Dutch, most recent Dutch FAQ specifically, which meant that if an EU seller has accommodation property outside the EU, whether or not if that's in a scope, and the Dutch are apparently of the view that yes, that is in scope. So meaning if I, an EU citizen, were to have a rental property Let me give you an example in Mexico, since we've mentioned it. So if I had, someone listed, a property listed on Airbnb in Mexico, I wish, then I would be in scope of the reporting. Airbnb in that example would have to report my earnings for this non-EU accommodation I'm renting out. So, and this sort of like confirms the question in reverse in a way, but of course this would have to be challenged at a legal level.
I'm going to look for Casa Attila on some on some of the more prominent platforms. Maybe I can find it.
Switching topics very quickly, Attila. Just one question I think is interesting as well, because it's so often asked, is if I have 100 sellers on my platform, do I have to apply any penalties? The penalty it says, but I imagine any penalties that may be imposed on me for each seller, or do I have to apply the penalty to the filing/submission that I do? So is it like a one-off, or is it per instance? Basically, is the question.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna have to respond with the Big Four answer, which, going back to my Big Four background, which is it depends.
It depends. Well, what does it depend on then?
So it depends on the country. So every country has penalties, of course, are the prerogative of countries locally. So every country has their own system of penalties. Most countries just applied their default tax penalty system to DAC7 as well. Some have created unique specific rules, and in many countries we are seeing that penalties there's a system of penalties. So usually there's one penalty for just late filing, so just a late penalty in general, or a non-compliance penalty. And on top of that, many countries defined penalties in some cases based on data points. So if you miss one field, that's one penalty. If you miss another field, that's another penalty. And in some cases, they defined penalties based on sellers. So exactly to that point. So if you would have 100 sellers and you're missing for all of them, and it's worth a penalty, then it's going to be a penalty 100 times.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note that as was just being, sorry, we're using our chat also, sorry, a questions field as a chat box, but people are making the observation that in some countries, by the way, it doesn't even get stipulated as easily as that.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
There is still some confusion. There's also another thing that we often get asked in connection with this is, if I'm filing centrally and I'm late, does that mean that which penalties do I apply? Do I apply the country in which I filed, or do I apply the penalties in where the filing should have gone through? Again, something to check with your advisors. I'm going to shoot from the hip and say that my interpretation of this when I was reading this was that it's a penalty per country where you should have been filing, irrespective of where you file. But again, something to be confirmed with the various advisors, because I've also seen differing interpretations here as well.
Yeah, and Attila, I think there's one really good question actually from a good friend of ours that is making a good point. I think so far you've been talking about like submission through XML or API, right? Or actually via API only. Is that the same across all countries? And if so, that creates quite a tremendous compliance burden, especially for the smaller platforms that may be in scope. And how are they dealing with that? Do you know? Because it feels like this is really made for the largest. And of course, from a data perspective, they are suffering the most probably. But you have smaller ones as well that may be in scope. How do they deal with this, other than going through a third-party vendor like ourselves?
Well, by the way, in the meantime, you may have seen a pop-up with a link. I just linked to my earlier blog post, which has a table and a list of all the different EU countries with the law for DAC7, the tax authority website, if they have one, technical documentation, FAQ, and a list of maximum penalties per country. So you can consult that list.
You can email it afterwards as well.
Yeah. You can email it afterwards as well. And so in terms of small companies, so how do they deal with this? Well, first and foremost, let me start with the most interesting example is, I think for many of these like really small platforms, like the Airbnbs of tomorrow or the Ubers of tomorrow that are really just, at their seed round, but they are already operating and they are already actually in scope of DAC7 because of course, there's no minimum thresholds in terms of the platform. we're seeing that, of course, ignorance is bliss. So I would speculate that a lot of them will not even understand internally that they're in scope. And at this point, I would highly advise advisors, especially on this call, to think about all those seed round or Series A, Series B type of startups, to take a look. I know that consultants have those clients as well, and it's worth notifying them. I just notified a local platform in Hungary. I saw them on Shark Tank, local version, last week, literally. I'm not kidding. And they're like an exact match for the DAC7 scope. And I texted the guy, one of the people in there on LinkedIn directly, hey, just FYI, you're in scope of this. Let me see what he gets back to me with this one.
Got it.
Yeah.
This is just to confirm.
Pre-advisory. Yeah, and many of them are flying under the radar. Many of them are, of course, writing code internally.
But there's no other way than that, right? So you either do it yourself directly by connecting, or you use a third-party vendor.
Yeah. Which
in that respect is, of course, not that different from, for example, e-invoicing or digital reporting regulations, but still for smaller taxpayers that can be quite a hurdle.
Team, just making a quick time check. We've got 4 minutes until the formal end of the webinar, and this we normally run over, team, just to say for others who are listening, we're not going to drop off and cut off, but we'll finish the thinking. But maybe I was thinking we can move on to the other issues and conflicts that we've experienced.
Yeah, go for it.
Other issues and conflict. What we mean by that is that you hear two opposing points of view, and both are in play at the same time. So in physics, will be a paradox, but here we have, for example, I mentioned a couple that I heard of, local versus central filing. Attila, can you talk about that one, or if any others that you?
Yeah. I have already mentioned so many conflicts. I'm sure I'm like stepping on toes left and right, and many of the people in the audience probably have differing views, and I fully understand all of that. So this is just like we're just reflecting our subjective opinions here. What I think the biggest conflicting view is whether or not the central filing approach is something that can be done. And whether it applies to every platform in scope of DAC7, irregardless of their actual company setup, how they're contracting with sellers locally, etc. So we've seen two ways to approach this. Some countries, namely Belgium, Ireland, Netherlands, and some other countries, Germany as well, are saying that yes, you can file centrally, and if you file with us, you don't need to file anywhere else anything. Well, aside from the notification to the tax authority that you're filing centrally in another country in Europe.
So you have to notify. You have to go in to the other tax and say, I'm not going to file here. I'm going to file somewhere else. Okay.
Yeah, that is always required if you are locally in scope otherwise. But the other approach is, of course, looking, there's like a very conservative approach when they say, okay, so if you have sellers in 10 countries, then you need to absolutely file in all of those 10 countries. And then there's different flavors of this. Some say that if you have some countries where you have a local entity that is locally directly contracting with the local sellers, then that is a local platform operator and therefore is required to file locally. What I would argue is, of course, that there's tons of evidence in the regulation, and some countries have specifically defined this in their guidance, that you can just appoint one company centrally in your company group if it's in reality, a related entity. And those rules are, of course, defined separately, similar to transfer pricing and such regulations, that, yes, you can just pinpoint to your HQ or European HQ entity and then say that, okay, this entity is filing for everything. And we're seeing that platforms are either taking approach A or approach B. And more interestingly, we are seeing that companies in the exact same or using the exact same business setup and company structure and having the same business model are at the same time taking the opposite approaches. So we've seen the same type of platform in one way going all the local filings, and then the other case, another platform with the same exact business model doing a central filing approach.
Just to understand very quickly, Attila, am I right that if I'm a non-EU platform filing in one of the member states, right? So let's say I opt, this is actually a question, I opt to file in, let's say, Ireland. I do not need to manually inform all the member states of my filing choice, right? That's kind of handled by the governments, member states themselves, no?
I would argue that you do need to notify locally,
all of them.
Yes, because if you are, so the rules don't say that you are not in. So let's say you're a non-resident platform, from the US maybe, and you have physical operations in Ireland and Germany. You pick Ireland for filing. There's no rule saying that if you file in Ireland, then you are exempt from the German obligation.
No, okay, but that's only
a rule saying
presence there, right?
Yeah,
so sorry, go on.
There's only a rule saying that if you do file in another country, then you must notify us locally. And you would still be in scope of the German rules. And this goes to another big conflict, where penalties apply. I am of the conservative view that platforms penalties apply locally. So if you're non-compliant in 10 countries, whether or not you're only filing in one country, penalties can potentially apply to you in each of those cases in every country.
But so if I, just to kind of like double click on that a little bit, if I don't have any presence whatsoever, because in your example, I would have presence in multiple member states, right? And I opt for one of them. What if I don't have any presence whatsoever and I just purely for DAC7 purposes opt to file in one of them, like let's say Ireland? Then I just still need to go to the other 26 and notify them. And how would I do that? Is there a specific prescribed way for that?
Yes. So in some countries, you need to do the exact same XML submission, but this time it's simply the header. So you are defining, okay, this is my central filing entity in Ireland or whatever. And then the file contains no other information. That is the approach, for instance, the Dutch tax authority took.
But that can't be correct, I would think. Sorry,
other countries, just to answer your question fully, in other countries, like a PDF or like a more formal notification must be submitted.
Because that last one I can imagine, although I would wonder, would you actually address that too, right? Maybe we can dig into that a little bit. Yeah, but that's a bit of a broad.
No, I think there's actually a form that you fill in.
That's what I'm asking. Is there like a specific form for it? Okay, got it. With the actual, because otherwise you just like a random.
No. You don't say, "Dear tax authority, I'm going to file somewhere else and send it to the ether." No. This is
because the API route that you're explaining seems to be not very feasible for most, because you would have to build an API connection purely to submit an empty file. That makes no sense.
Or of course, engage a local service provider.
Yeah, but that would significantly increase your compliance cost, I imagine, right?
Exactly.
Got it.
Rob, I think some of these, it's a good question. No, hold on. It's a
very
really
good question. Yeah.
It's a very good question, but whether or not you have to notify each one, I think in an ideal world, let's maybe just provide some feedback in case anybody is listening. It would be nice to be able to file within one jurisdiction, and that 100%. Information, in addition, saying this person's filing here once you've registered, versus having to go to 27 different EU member states and get that. But V2, I imagine, 2024 filing might be something a little bit easier. But
what can people, Attila, maybe just for the last minute before we wrap it up, because I do know that people have to jump off. What can people expect from you, us, on this going forward? Do you have any other materials that are worthwhile sharing? Can they reach out to you for specific questions that you may be able to help them with? How does this work?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So first and foremost, we have the Fonoa blog where we're following these updates. Of course, this past period has been very busy with updates, and I think it will ramp up again a year from now when we're seeing the second submission date. Definitely follow all three of us on LinkedIn. We're also regularly posting the updates as we hear them, and we're trying to follow other local providers and other local advisors We have regular webinars that follow other topics as well. And I'm sure you can mention a few other, and our newsletter, of course.
Yeah, okay. But so in terms of what people can expect, updates from you via social media and or from our website. They can reach out to you, I imagine, as well if they have questions.
Definitely.
You're always happy to help, or share your Mexican Airbnb. I hope, at least with me. In terms of like a list of upcoming new regulations, someone asked for that earlier, and I promised them that I will bring them in touch with you and the team. I think it would be helpful to maybe ask the audience, not per se right now, but to share what they are looking for, so we can provide them with that. Because I know that we have a lot of materials internally, so it could be helpful to also share that with some of the folks externally, especially now that it's literally a few minutes before the filing deadline, basically, right?
Oh, yes, you're very right. So we do track the similar regulations coming our way outside the EU, specifically in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and many other countries. The UK coming online, of course, famously next year as well. So we are extending our coverage based on client demand. We can get rolling for any platform pretty quickly at this point. We've got the basic framework. So we're trying to follow this as closely as possible.
Last one, very important point that I don't think you touched upon, maybe I missed it, is text number validation. Did you touch upon it? You didn't, right?
I don't think so specifically.
Okay. Can I just
lightly?
Yeah, to be mindful of the time for everyone. What I think the TLDR there is, so the kind of like the long story short, is that there's ambiguity around what level of validation needs to take place on the data that you submit. So on the text identification number, kind of like validation of the underlying sellers on your platform. There are many different views. Sometimes the views differ per country. We've learned from tax authorities as well, and from customer and or company experiences. I think it's really important that you look into the requirements locally, and or, which is the case for, of course, all of our customers on the line, or at least virtually all of them, use a service provider like Fonoa to make sure that you validate those numbers thoroughly, because that's quite an important one. A lot of questions can pop up based on invalid numbers or numbers that don't match with the actual seller information that you have, right?
Rob, can I add to that if we have heard of from some of our clients receiving input from specific tax authority contacts from their large business unit saying like, hey guys, you only need to validate the format. If you get that verbally, get it in writing. Yes, very important. Make sure that whatever you get back on like ease of number validation, get it in writing. You don't want it to come back and bite. Because that is definitely very different. It's not certainly what we're hearing from other tax. Not at all. Okay. Well, Attila, Eiko, thanks so much for now. I think we could probably go on a little bit longer with a lot of the folks on the line as well, looking at all of the questions. What I would suggest is that we take all the questions that we got. We reach out to everyone that has an outstanding question one-on-one afterwards as well. And perhaps if issues still persist after the official extended deadlines, we will still do another session like this. But for now, thanks everyone for joining. I think this was useful. And looking at all of the questions, it definitely is a topic of interest for many. And looking forward to see you on the next episode. Wonderful. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, everyone. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.